History is often shaped by what's hidden, not just what's told. The stories that remain in the shadows can be just as powerful as those that make headlines. Sometimes the most significant events are the ones that never reach the public eye, buried in secrecy and silence. The Vietnam War is remembered for its battles and protests, for the images of helicopters over rice paddies and the voices of a generation demanding peace in the streets of America. But beneath that was a secret war, one fought with spies, informants, and assassins. In the shadows, a different kind of conflict raged, invisible to most, but deadly real for those caught in its web. This was the Phoenix Program, a covert campaign designed to dismantle the Viet Cong's political infrastructure, targeting the very roots of the insurgency. Officially, it was a precise effort to neutralize enemy leaders. The goal was to cut off the head of the snake, to disrupt the networks that kept the Viet Cong alive. In reality, it blurred the lines between soldier and civilian, justice and revenge. Ordinary people were swept up in the chaos, accused, interrogated, and sometimes disappeared without a trace. The program relied on shaky intelligence and minimal oversight, making abuse inevitable. Mistakes were made, and innocent lives were often caught in the crossfire. Phoenix was the CIA's war, psychological operations and political assassinations, running parallel to the military fight. It was a campaign waged in the shadows, where truth was often the first casualty. It was born from frustration. The U.S. could win battles, but not the war against a deeply rooted political movement. The enemy was everywhere and nowhere, blending into the population. The response was to build a machine to hunt and destroy the Viet Cong's shadow government. Night after night, raids swept through villages, searching for those who might be enemies, but in doing so, the U.S. unleashed forces it couldn't control, leaving a legacy of terror and mistrust. The scars of this hidden war would linger long after the fighting stopped. This is the story of that hidden war, a war fought in silence, whose consequences still echo in the shadows of history. The Phoenix Program was the culmination of years of covert CIA operations and experimentation in Southeast Asia, as the agency sought new ways to counter the growing communist threat. Determined to halt the spread of communism in South Vietnam, the United States poured resources, advisors, and intelligence into the region, hoping to turn the tide of the conflict. Early programs like the Counter-Terror Program trained elite South Vietnamese units in unconventional warfare, teaching them to raid, kidnap, and assassinate suspected Viet Cong sympathizers, often under the cover of darkness. By 1967, despite the massive presence of U.S. troops and military hardware, the Viet Cong's influence continued to spread, especially in rural areas where government control was weakest. American planners soon realized that the real enemy was not just the Viet Cong soldiers fighting in the jungles, but the shadowy political network, the VCI, that directed, supplied, and recruited them from the shadows. The Phoenix Program was launched to coordinate intelligence and operations against the VCI, uniting the CIA, U.S. military, and South Vietnamese security forces in a single, secretive campaign. On paper, Phoenix was described as a law enforcement initiative, targeting only the most dangerous enemy operatives and dismantling their networks through arrests and interrogations. Led by CIA veteran Robert Comer, Phoenix established a network of intelligence centers across South Vietnam, each tasked with identifying and neutralizing suspected Viet Cong infrastructure. The program's sprawling bureaucracy gave it an air of legitimacy and order, but beneath the surface, it quickly became a mechanism for unchecked violence, secret detentions, and summary executions. In the shadows of the Vietnam War, a new kind of conflict had begun. One fought not just on the battlefield but in the alleys, villages, and interrogation rooms of South Vietnam. The Shadow War had begun. The Phoenix Program targeted the Viet Cong infrastructure, a shadow government embedded in every village. The VCI was a network of cadres, administrators, and spies, blending seamlessly with civilians. This made it nearly impossible to distinguish friend from foe. The VCI ran schools, collected taxes, and enforced its own justice, making it the true authority in many areas. American officials realized that as long as the VCI survived, the insurgency could always recover. The strategy became clear: dismantle the VCI and the revolution would collapse. Phoenix aimed to decapitate the movement by removing its leaders and administrators, but targeting a political structure so intertwined with civilian life was fraught with danger. The challenge of identifying true VCI members would prove to be the program's fatal flaw. The war against a ghostly enemy would soon spiral out of control. Officially, the Phoenix program was designed to follow a strict four-step process: identify, capture, interrogate, and neutralize. On paper, it was a methodical approach to dismantling the Viet Cong's shadowy infrastructure. The first step involved gathering intelligence, names, locations, and affiliations, through a network of informants, surveillance, and sometimes intercepted communications. This information was then carefully analyzed and cross-checked by intelligence officers, who worked to build detailed dossiers on suspected Viet Cong operatives. Once a suspect was identified, the next step was arrest, usually carried out by South Vietnamese forces, particularly the feared Provincial Reconnaissance Units, or PRUs. These units, often guided by American advisors, were tasked with apprehending suspects and bringing them in for interrogation. The stated goal was to persuade suspects to defect, provide information, or, if necessary, imprison them. Lethal force was officially a last resort, reserved for only the most dangerous targets. This legalistic framework gave Phoenix a veneer of legitimacy and plausible deniability for American involvement. But beneath the surface, the reality was far more complicated. The relentless pressure for results quickly corrupted the process, turning it into a numbers game. Americans often kept their distance from the most brutal aspects, while South Vietnamese forces carried out the dirty work, sometimes with little oversight. Official documents spoke of due process and legal protections, but the real message was clear: get results, and get them fast. The ideals of the system were quickly overshadowed by a campaign of fear and intimidation. What began as a blueprint for targeted counterinsurgency soon devolved into a cycle of violence and retribution. The Phoenix program's carefully crafted image bore little resemblance to the harsh reality on the ground, where the line between justice and terror was often blurred, and the cycle of violence was set in motion. Phoenix depended entirely on intelligence, but in wartime Vietnam, good intelligence was rare. Much of it came from paid informants who often named innocent people for money or to settle personal scores. A single anonymous tip could land someone on a blacklist, with no evidence or trial. Interrogations relied on torture, producing false confessions and more wrongful arrests. The result was a self-perpetuating cycle. Torture led to false names, which led to more arrests and more torture. Instead of winning hearts and minds, Phoenix spread fear and resentment. Anyone could be accused, arrested, or killed based on rumor. The program meant to surgically remove the VCI instead tore apart rural society. The war on whispers became a war on the people. The consequences were devastating. The Phoenix program's flaws were magnified by a disastrous policy: quotas. American officials demanded proof of success, setting monthly targets for VCI neutralizations. This turned Phoenix into a numbers game, where meeting quotas mattered more than justice. Local chiefs were promoted or punished based on their body counts, incentivizing false arrests and killings. Innocent civilians were swept up, labeled as VCI, and reported as neutralized. Assassination became routine, quicker and easier than arrest. Blacklists became hit lists, and categories like captured or killed were often falsified. The obsession with statistics corrupted the program's purpose. William Colby later admitted Phoenix was responsible for over 20,000 deaths, but how many were truly VCI? The quota system kept the machine running, consuming lives for numbers Washington demanded. Justice was lost to bureaucracy. The human cost was staggering. Phoenix's decentralized structure fueled its brutality. While funded and guided by Americans, operations were carried out by South Vietnamese forces, often corrupt and unaccountable. Local officials used Phoenix to settle scores, extort money, and eliminate rivals. PRUs, armed and trained by the CIA, acted as private armies for province chiefs. Oversight was weak. American advisors were young, inexperienced, or complicit. The system enabled widespread abuse, turning many regions into zones of terror. Instead of building loyalty, Phoenix deepened hatred and distrust of the Saigon regime. The program's violence became both widespread and unaccountable. Was Phoenix effective? Some say it crippled the Viet Cong's political network, especially after the Tet Offensive, but this tactical success came at a huge cost. Countless innocent civilians were arrested, tortured, or killed. The program created a climate of fear. alienating the population and driving many toward the Viet Cong. Its legacy is not pacification, but state-sponsored terror and trauma. Strategically, Phoenix may have been irrelevant. The war was ultimately won by North Vietnamese military power, not the VCI. Phoenix became a costly sideshow, failing to change the war's outcome. Its true legacy is moral, a systematic violation of human rights under bureaucratic cover. The program eroded American moral authority and trust among the Vietnamese. Phoenix stands as a warning of what happens when principles are abandoned for victory. For years, Phoenix operated in the shadows, unknown to most Americans. In the early 1970s, whistleblowers and journalists exposed its reality: torture, assassination, and indiscriminate killing. Congressional hearings in 1971 brought the scandal into the open. William Colby defended the program, citing thousands of neutralizations, but the sheer scale of abuse shocked the public. Phoenix became synonymous with assassination and state terror, fueling the anti-war movement. The scandal eroded support for the war and trust in government. Under pressure, the U.S. distanced itself, handing Phoenix to the South Vietnamese and withdrawing advisors. The program's story became a cautionary tale about unchecked power and secret warfare. Phoenix revealed the moral and political disaster at the heart of America's Vietnam strategy. Its legacy would haunt the nation for decades,